Welcome back, you night owls. Tonight we dive deep into the slippery, squishy, stinky secrets of history's most glamorous women. What did it take to be considered beautiful in the ancient world? Well, if you're imagining warm milk baths and scented oils, you're only partly right. For some queens, beauty came with a stink, and sometimes a side of reptile poop. Tonight, we'll drift through perfumed halls and golden palaces, but don't get too cozy, because the things they rubbed on their skin, slathered in their hair and soaked into their pores might just curl your toes. And fair warning, they probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your city and local time in the comments too. I love seeing who's tuning in from where. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Our tale begins in Egypt, where golden sunlight slices through lattice screens and warm stone baths nestled in cool chambers. Here, surrounded by attendants and luxuries beyond counting, Cleopatra VII, Philopator, last queen of Egypt, slips gracefully into a bath not just of milk, but laced with something far less appetizing: crocodile dung. Yes, crocodile dung. While Cleopatra is better known for bathing in donkey milk to soften her skin, a well-recorded habit, fringe records and less discussed anecdotes suggest something even smellier mingled with those silky soaks. Crocodile dung, it was believed, had magical and preservative properties. A paste of the stuff was sometimes used as an early contraceptive, but in Cleopatra's case, her palace beauty rituals may have gone even deeper into the bizarre. Her royal attendants may have mixed dried, powdered croc dung into bathing salves and masks, especially during certain lunar phases. Why? In the deeply symbolic world of ancient Egyptian medicine, crocodiles represented both chaos and protection. Smearing their waste on one's body, oddly enough, could have been seen as a mystical way of invoking divine shields against aging, curses, or even rivals. One account suggests that during her travels on the Nile, Cleopatra visited sacred crocodile ponds and gathered offerings not just for religious rites but for personal use. Attendants dried the excrement in the sun and stored it in alabaster jars. The resulting paste, pungent, gritty, and probably crawling with who knows what, would be mixed with crushed lotus petals or honey before being applied to the skin. The smell? Strong enough to knock out a Roman general, probably. But Cleopatra had other ideas. Maybe she masked it with myrrh. Maybe she simply didn't mind. After all, when you're ruling a kingdom and seducing empires, a little stink is a small price for divine beauty. Modern dermatologists, understandably, would rather not weigh in on the croc dung question. But historians still argue whether this ritual was widely practiced or limited to elite circles obsessed with immortality. There's even one fringe theory that suggests the use of dung as a kind of pre-antibiotic treatment, the fermented bacteria acting as a very early probiotic skin mask. Not medically sound by today's standards, but hey, neither was leeching. We'll get to that. In ancient Egypt, everything had symbolism, and beauty wasn't just about appearance. It was power. Smooth skin showed status. Soft features implied wealth and divine favour. And so the lengths to achieve it were not only accepted, they were expected. Imagine the preparation. A servant unseals a clay pot. The smell of sun-dried dung and floral oils hits the air. The queen reclines on polished stone as the mixture is daubed gently onto her limbs and face. Time slows. Outside, reeds sway in the river breeze, but within the palace silence reigns. A ritual is underway, and beauty is becoming weaponized. Crocodiles weren't the only creatures contributing to these regimens. Snakes, beetles, bees, each will have their moment later in our journey. But tonight, the Nile's most toothy resident takes centre stage. Crocodile gods like Sobek were worshipped, and their physical remnants, yes, even droppings, were thought to hold residual divinity. To bathe in that willingly was more than skincare. It was a sacred act. Still, one has to wonder, did Cleopatra enjoy it? Did she really believe in its powers, or was it just one more duty of beauty? Did she recline in that bath thinking about empire and alliances, or was she secretly holding her breath? It's worth noting that this wasn't just Cleopatra's domain. Egyptian papyri mentioned dung from various animals used in poultices, cosmetics, and even fertility treatments. The line between medicine, magic, and makeup was gloriously blurred. Whether she pioneered the practice or simply followed priestly advice, Cleopatra wasn't alone in her earthier routines. One curious side note: the scent of crocodile dung mixed with lotus and frankincense reportedly lingered on her skin long after she left the bath. Roman spies, or lovers, might have been able to detect her presence before they even saw her. A fragrant trail of queenly funk. Makes perfume counters seem a bit tame, doesn't it? Of course, not everyone in her court was bathing in reptile residue. This was a luxury ritual, one reserved for queens, high priestesses, or possibly a favoured concubine. For the average Egyptian woman, beauty looked like kohl eyeliner, henna tattoos and oil rub-downs. Simple, effective and less dung-dependent. But Cleopatra, she was something else entirely. A political strategist, linguist and cultural chameleon, she embraced the exotic in ways few rulers dared. Her rituals weren't just about allure, they were statements of identity. When she painted her face with lead-based coal or soaked in something sticky and strange, she was becoming a living icon. A goddess among mortals, and she wasn't even done. Her beauty chest, uncovered in fragments over centuries, held ingredients from across the ancient world, resins from Arabia, powders from India, and oils from Nubia. But some of its jars, cracked and blackened with time, may once have held that now notorious paste. The Nile may have washed away much of her legend, but her scent, at least in theory, lingers still. There's something delightfully rebellious in imagining the world's most famous queen emerging from a bath scented with dung and sacred flowers, her skin glistening under torchlight, her gaze steady, her smirk undeniable. Maybe that's the real reason the ancients believed in its power. Not because it worked, but because Cleopatra made it look like it did. Long before lipstick came in tidy tubes and matte finish was a buzzword, the women of ancient Mesopotamia were painting their lips red with a determination that bordered on the obsessive. In the royal courts of Sumer, Akkad and Babylon, elite queens and priestesses didn't just want colour, they wanted power, and their pouts were proof. But their vibrant lip tints came with a grim recipe: crushed insects, oxidized minerals, and the occasional dash of toxic metal. The most famous ingredient? Cochineal beetles, tiny crimson creatures that, when dried and ground, produce an incredibly bright red dye. Known today as carmine, it still colours some of our cosmetics and food. But for Mesopotamian queens, this was more than just pretty makeup. Wearing red lips was a status symbol, a sign of divine femininity, and, depending on how bold the shade, a symbol of seduction, fertility, or outright danger. The redder, the better. Imagine a queen of Ur reclining on a carved ivory throne, her lips shimmering not just with beetle juice, but with a paste of red ochre, iron oxide, and a touch of pulverized lead for that extra sheen. Servants hovered nearby with tiny applicators, usually reeds or carved bone, dabbing and shaping the colour with ritualistic precision. Lip art wasn't just aesthetic, it was ceremonial. The application was slow, deliberate, almost sacred. What's more, the Mesopotamians didn't stop at red. Royal women dabbled in purple, black and gold lip stains, each signalling different meanings. Purple for divine inspiration, black for mourning or mysticism. Gold, crafted from actual flecks of metal, was reserved for the highest of ceremonies and royal appearances, but red was the most potent. It was life. It was blood. It was the mouth of Ishtar herself, goddess of love and war. Speaking of war, beauty routines were not exactly harmless. Lead-based lip pigments, favoured for their glossy finish, could slowly poison the wearer over time. Historians still debate whether these queens were aware of the danger. Some argue they believed the discomfort or illness that followed was part of the power, a divine tax for transcendent beauty. Others think the toxicity was masked by aromatic oils and perfumes, or simply ignored in favour of trend and tradition. After all, fashion waits for no one, not even royalty. The fringe theorists go even further. Some believe lip pigments were laced with hallucinogens, substances derived from rare plants like mandrake or henbane. In small doses, these may have been used to enhance trance-like states during rituals. A queen's painted lips, under this theory, weren't just beautiful. They were portals, keys to the divine. In one recovered tablet from Lagash, there's a mention of the blood of the sacred mountain beetle being given to the mouth of the priestess during a full moon rite. The translation is debated, of course. but it suggests lip colour had ceremonial purpose far beyond vanity. It could be part of invoking spirits, warding off evil, or blessing the crops. The beauty cabinets of these royal women were likely filled with tiny jars, stone, clay, and sometimes even gold, each containing dried pigments and powdered insects. These were often blended with oils, sesame, almond, or castor. The richer the oil, the smoother the application. And since mirrors were a rare luxury, application often required a helper, another woman trained not only in the arts of cosmetics, but in the symbolism behind each hue and shape. One quirky fact: lip painting in Mesopotamia was so central to identity that women were often buried with their pigments. Some tombs contained small cosmetic kits, complete with tiny spatulas, grinding stones, and pigments still vivid after millennia. The red lives on. Even the shape of the lips mattered. Queens often enhanced the natural shape with drawn-in peaks or exaggerated corners, mimicking the curves of celestial bodies or sacred geometry. One popular style imitated the crescent moon, believed to align the wearer with the cycles of nature and fertility. Others framed the mouth in harsh, geometric lines meant to resemble cuneiform characters, turning the face into scripture. And yes, men took notice. Mesopotamian poets wrote about the ripe pomegranate mouths of noble women, and kings often described their brides' lips in tribute offerings. One tablet even records a ruler commissioning an entire shipment of crimson dye to paint the smiles of my queens like the wings of the firebird. Whether that bird existed or not, the metaphor holds. Bold lips were the feathers of royalty. Now here's where things get even grosser. Some lip dyes, especially those intended to last through long ceremonies or public appearances, were mixed with animal fat or even tallow rendered from fish bladders. The fatty base helped the pigment adhere to skin, but it also made the paste smell fishy. To mask this, perfumed resins were stirred in, including frankincense and myrrh. The result? A sticky, scented, vividly red lip stain that smelled like a temple, but lasted for hours, or until it started to melt in the desert sun. The process of making the pigment was far from pleasant. The beetles were harvested, dried in the sun, then ground to dust using stone mortars. For some elite dyes, only female insects were used, harvested during specific moon phases. The belief was that their colour was stronger and more magical. The red powder was then sifted through fine cloth and blended with binder oils, sometimes fermented for weeks to deepen the hue. One queen, Kubaba of Kish, possibly the first recorded female ruler in history, is said to have worn a mouth the colour of victory, a reference to the deep scarlet she favoured. Whether that was metaphor or literal beetle guts is still up for debate, but you get the idea. Beauty was battle, and the lips were the front line. To today's eye, painting oneself with bug paste sounds like something out of a horror movie, but in Mesopotamia it was sophistication. A woman who could afford such things was one with access to trade routes, servants, and knowledge. Lip colour was as much a display of empire as it was allure, and there's something oddly empowering about it. These women didn't shy away from effort. Their beauty was earned, crushed, brewed, and smeared into being. It was artistry, ritual, and sometimes a slow form of self-sacrifice. Because despite the beetle blood, the lead, the fish fat, and the fermented oils, those red lips still smiled. They gave speeches. They recited prayers. They kissed babies and threatened ambassadors. They whispered palace secrets and sealed royal decrees. In a world where women's voices were often ignored, a painted mouth became its own kind of proclamation. So the next time you swipe on a little gloss, spare a thought for those ancient queens. They walked so you could slay, with far less bug juice. The queen lies still, her skin pale and glowing in candlelight. Around her, the room buzzes quietly with murmured chants and the rhythmic drip of oil. But what draws the eye isn't her silken robes or jewelled rings. It's the fat black leeches sliding along her bare arms, slowly gorging themselves on royal blood. Welcome to the unsettling beauty regimen of medieval and early modern Europe, where leeches weren't just for medicine. They were part of the glow-up. Noble women and queens, ever eager to achieve that elusive porcelain complexion, turned to bloodletting in all its slippery slurping glory. And yes, sometimes the method of choice was live, wriggling, hungry leeches. It's hard to imagine, but in the candlelit chambers of European castles and courtrooms, women willingly subjected themselves to these wriggling creatures in the name of beauty. Why? because pale skin meant purity, status, and wealth. If your skin looked untouched by sun and labour, you must be rich enough to stay indoors, healthy enough to avoid blemishes, and blessed enough to be beautiful. But if nature didn't bless you with that translucent glow, no problem. Just remove some of your blood until the rest of you looked properly ghost-like. Leeching wasn't entirely random, of course. Physicians and apothecaries, some trained, others self-taught, guided these rituals with charts and diagrams. The face, temples, neck and shoulders were considered prime real estate for bloodletting, both for health and cosmetic purposes. One 15th century manual advised applying leeches near the hairline to relieve excess vapours that might cause facial swelling or acne. And while it sounds absurd now, they genuinely believed this worked. Of course, not all queens went full Dracula. Some opted for the cleaner version, small cuts made by a physician, followed by the draining of a measured amount of blood into a silver bowl. Then came herbal compresses, cooling tonics, and days of rest, during which time the face would take on a fragile pallor, not because it was healthy, but because the body was slightly anemic. Voila, instant glow. It wasn't just the aesthetic that motivated this ritual. Medieval medicine operated under the theory of the four humours: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, and it was believed that beauty came from balance. Too much blood. You'd be ruddy, puffy, prone to blemishes. The solution was simple: let it out. A pint or two, ideally under the guidance of a court physician, who'd be paid handsomely to make you look just a bit fainter than usual. Queen Isabella of Castile was rumoured to have undergone seasonal leeching, not for illness, but to maintain her complexion. And in France, Catherine de' Medici's court took bloodletting to an almost artistic level, pairing the ritual with perfumes and rosewater baths to enhance the afterglow. Whether it worked or not, well, that's still up for scholarly debate. Some historians argue that the placebo effect was enough, that women truly believed in the purging power of blood and thus radiated confidence and allure afterward. Others think it was just social momentum. Everyone else was doing it, so the Queen must as well. A more fringe belief held that releasing blood also released spiritual impurities. One late medieval mystic wrote of a noblewoman who claimed her dreams were clearer and her thoughts more serene after a leeching session. While it's unlikely this was grounded in science, it underscores how deeply entwined beauty, wellness and mysticism were. Now, let's talk logistics. Where did the leeches come from? Usually they were harvested from ponds and marshes by a class of workers known as leech collectors. These hardy souls, often poor and desperate, would wade into the water barefoot and wait for the creatures to latch onto their skin. Once full, the leeches were carefully removed and stored in ceramic jars or brass containers with damp moss. They had to be kept alive and hungry for optimal effectiveness, which meant storing them in cool, dark places, like palace basements or apothecary closets. It wasn't uncommon for queens to own their own private collection of leeches, treated almost like prized pets. Some were even named. One particularly dramatic tale tells of a duchess in Bavaria who insisted her favourite leech, Sebastian, was the only one allowed near her temples because he knew her moods. Whether Sebastian was a leech or a metaphor we'll never know, but the mental image lingers. And then there was the ceremony of it all. The leeching wasn't just a medical procedure, it was theatre. Silk cushions, silver bowls, embroidered towels, and even music might accompany the event, especially if the Queen was hosting it in her chambers for curious noblewomen. Because nothing says bonding like watching your friend slowly lose a cup of blood while sipping herbal tea and gossiping about the court. Sometimes the sessions didn't go smoothly. Leeches could attach in awkward places, refuse to let go or, horrifyingly, burst if overfed. A rare but real risk. Physicians carried small salt pots to sprinkle on the leech's head if it wouldn't release, causing it to detach and probably sulk in its little jar afterward. Infection was always a threat, as was fainting or worse, depending on how much blood was drawn. Still, the obsession persisted. One French manual from the 16th century even included fashion advice for post-leeching. Wear veils of thin gauze to show the pallor without the weakness, and tint the cheeks with wine if appearance at court is necessary. Translation: show off that fresh leech glow, but don't look too sick. The use of leeches eventually faded as medical science advanced, and the four humours theory fell out of favour. But the aesthetic ideal, pale, smooth, bloodless beauty lingered for centuries. Even into the Victorian era, women were using vinegar and starvation to chase that ghostly look, long after the leeches had gone out of style. Still, in the dim candlelight of medieval castles, there's something eerie about the idea of beauty through bleeding, of queens who lay perfectly still as cold creatures latched onto their skin, drawing away not just blood but flaws, anxieties, imperfections. Maybe they believed that with every drop lost they were becoming closer to perfection, and maybe, just maybe, it worked. Not scientifically, but socially. Because in a world where status was written on your face, where too much colour implied labour and scandal, and where court politics were as cutthroat as any battlefield, a little leech therapy might have been the difference between being seen and being invisible. So next time you glance at a tube of concealer or a bottle of toner, be grateful it doesn't squirm, or bite, or leave you slightly dizzy. Because once upon a time beauty came with fangs. In the hushed chambers of China's imperial court, where silk whispers along polished floors and incense coils lazily through the air, beauty is both an art and a weapon. Empresses and concubines, always vying for favour and influence, are willing to try anything to preserve their youth and stand out among thousands. And anything often meant dipping into their personal apothecary of risky ingredients, including one that would make any modern dermatologist shriek, "Mercury. Yes, that mercury." The same shimmering silvery liquid once found in thermometers and marked with hazard symbols today. In ancient China, mercury, particularly in the form of cinnabar, a bright red mercury sulfide, was believed to have alchemical properties. It was thought to promote longevity, ward off evil, and perhaps most importantly to the women of the Forbidden City, maintain flawless, radiant skin. So while court physicians brewed elaborate potions for emperors chasing immortality, their female counterparts were crafting facial creams laced with the tiniest sparkle of poison. The logic, however flawed, was this: if mercury could preserve the body from decay, surely it could preserve the face from wrinkles. Cinnabar was ground into a fine powder and mixed with crushed pearls, jade dust and herbal infusions, then blended with sesame or camellia oil into a bright silky paste. Applied carefully with soft brushes, this concoction worked like a tinted moisturizer meets primer. It gave the skin a luminous porcelain finish beloved by the elite. But beneath that glow, damage was being done, cell by cell, layer by layer. It wasn't just cinnabar either. Some empresses consumed pills containing liquid mercury, believing it purified the body and extended youth. Scholars still argue whether they truly understood the toxic effects, or simply dismissed them as necessary risks in their pursuit of perfection. Fringe beliefs within Taoist alchemy encourage small repeated doses of mercury as a kind of spiritual purgative. For some, beauty wasn't just skin deep, it was metaphysical. One of the most infamous cases involves Empress Wu Zetian, the only woman to rule China in her own name. Known for her ruthless politics and ethereal appearance, Wu reportedly used creams and powders containing mercury to maintain her ghost-like skin. Though she lived into her 80s, a remarkable feat for the era, accounts suggest her later years were marked by tremors, mood swings, and a decline in mental clarity. Symptoms that, today, we might attribute to mercury poisoning. Still, Empress Wu was praised for her divine complexion, and the association between red powders and royal power persisted. Cinnabar wasn't just makeup, it was a status symbol. The deeper the pigment, the richer the wearer, and the more dangerous the application. Curiously, while the empresses painted their faces with this radiant red, the symbolism extended to the afterlife. Burial masks made from cinnabar-coated cloth were sometimes placed over the faces of the dead to preserve their features and ward off decay. In this way, the substance bridged beauty and death, a connection not lost on those who wore it daily. Modern scientists examining burial sites and preserved court cosmetics have confirmed high levels of mercury in ancient face creams. One excavated container, still sealed, held a red paste that shimmered with danger under the microscope. A closer analysis revealed enough mercury to cause skin damage within weeks of regular use, and yet the desire for alabaster beauty pushed countless women to keep dipping their fingers into the jar. What's more fascinating is how these rituals weren't hidden, they were celebrated. Scroll paintings show court ladies applying creams in rows, dabbing each other's faces and chatting as if brushing on poison were a social event. Manuals on feminine refinement listed ingredients proudly, blending mercury with saffron, ginseng or gold flakes, as if a dash of toxic metal were just another aromatic spice. And speaking of gold, some formulas paired mercury with real gold dust. This added shimmer, yes, but also reinforced the idea of immortality through alchemy. Gold and mercury were seen as opposite forces, one pure, one transformative. Together, they were believed to realign the body's chi, balancing internal and external energy. Whether that energy included hallucinations or hair loss, well, small price to pay. There's a haunting beauty in this, how the women of the Forbidden City embraced the very element that might slowly destroy them. In their quest for eternal youth, they treated their bodies like living scrolls, inscribed with centuries of belief, tradition, and hope. Still, not everyone in the palace dabbled in cinnabar. Some favoured herbal treatments, rice masks, or jade rollers chilled on blocks of ice. These gentler methods also aimed to brighten the complexion, but they lacked the instant radiance of mercury-based creams. And in a place where visual impression meant everything, delay wasn't an option. A concubine might have only a brief window to catch the emperor's attention. Glow mattered. One curious footnote: records from a Ming dynasty physician described the practice of mercury steaming. Women would sit in a tent filled with vapours from heated cinnabar and herbs, inhaling the mix in the name of detoxification. It sounds absurd now, but echoes the spa treatments we see today, just with significantly fewer hazard warnings. There's also a superstition that grew within the palace walls, that those who wore mercury powder could not cry, not because they were strong, but because tears would streak the face, revealing the true skin beneath and breaking the illusion. Some sources suggest that women used wax under their eyes to prevent emotional breakdowns from ruining their painstakingly applied cosmetics. Imagine the pressure to be beautiful, silent, and tearless. As the dynasties passed, the popularity of cinnabar makeup waned. During the Qing era, alternative pigments began to emerge, still bold but slightly less lethal. However, traces of mercury-based beauty lingered well into the 19th century. Even today, certain traditional remedies and cosmetics sold in obscure markets contain trace amounts, prompting international bans and health warnings. But perhaps the most poetic aspect of this beauty ritual is its double-edged nature. The very substance meant to freeze time, to preserve beauty, was also quietly eroding it. Slowly, day by day, the skin would thin, the organs strain, and the mind, so often the casualty, would begin to fray. Still, there's no denying the mystique. In the candlelight of a lacquered dressing room as silk rustles and a servant stirs a crimson cream in a jade bowl, the effect must have been mesmerising. A face gleaming with otherworldly brightness, a gaze sharp with purpose, an empress, radiant as the moon, and just as untouchable. So next time you read the label on your skincare and it proudly boasts mercury-free, say a little thank you to the women who learned the hard way that beauty, while timeless, should never come at the cost of sanity. Deep within the shaded courtyards of ancient Korea's royal palaces, where jade-green roofs curve like dragon spines and delicate paper screens flutter with the breeze, women of the Joseon dynasty begin their morning rituals. Attendants bring bowls of steamed rice, carved combs and slender brushes, but the most coveted item arrives in a lacquered box lined with silk. Inside, a single, glistening snail, or more accurately, the mucus trail it leaves behind. Long before modern beauty brands rebranded snail slime as a miracle hydrator, Korean court women were massaging this unlikely secretion into their skin, trusting it to preserve their youth, fade their blemishes, and add a dewy sheen to their cheeks. It sounds implausible, perhaps even a little slimy, but for these queens and concubines, the sticky secretion of the humble gastropod was liquid gold. And they weren't wrong, at least not entirely. Snail mucin is naturally rich in hyaluronic acid, glycolic acid, and proteins that promote skin regeneration. Modern science has confirmed many of the benefits, but in the Joseon court these properties were discovered through observation, tradition, and no small amount of trial and error. It likely began with farmers. Observing that their hands healed faster and looked smoother after handling snails, they passed this odd knowledge through whispers and wives' tales. Over time, the trend trickled up, migrating from rural households to elite herbalists, who repackaged the secret into a luxury good. By the time it reached the gates of the royal palace, snail mucin was mixed with herbs, aged for potency, and applied during the full moon under strict ritual. Queens like Inmok and Myeongsong, revered not only for their political acumen but also their legendary beauty, are said to have used snail-based creams nightly. An attendant would gently press the essence into their faces with silk pads, taking care not to disrupt the queen's intricate hairstyle or delicate rice powder already dusted on her cheeks. And it wasn't just applied once. This was a ritual of layers. Snail mucin went on after an herbal toner, but before the ginseng balm and just before the pearl-infused night cream. The layering created a kind of protective barrier, trapping moisture and locking in that youthful glow. To the untrained eye, it might have looked like nothing more than a gleaming face in a candlelit mirror, but every shine, every shimmer, was a carefully calculated act of beauty. The source of the slime naturally mattered. Not just any snail would do. The favoured breed was the giant East Asian forest snail, slow-moving and plentiful in Korea's misty highlands. These snails were kept in controlled environments, fed ginseng leaves, mulberry bark, and lotus petals to sweeten their secretion. Handlers believed the snail's diet could influence the effectiveness of its mucin. The more luxurious the snail's life, the more potent its slime, and the collection process? Meticulously slow. Palace handlers would gently coax the snails across a glass surface, then scrape the trail using fine brushes into ceramic jars. No snails were harmed, at least not usually. Each animal was reused for weeks, carefully rotated through feeding and production cycles. It sounds laborious, but in a society that prized harmony with nature, this wasn't seen as strange. It was considered respectful. Still, some historians argue about the scale of snail usage. Could the palace really have maintained enough slime to supply its women nightly? Fringe scholars suggest that only the highest-ranking women had access to pure mucin, while others used diluted versions blended with rice water or egg yolk. Some even speculate that snail slime's popularity may have been amplified by beauty manuals written in the 18th century, romanticising earlier generations' regimens in ways that weren't entirely accurate. But even if some of it was exaggerated, the core truth remains. Snail mucin was an established part of beauty lore, and its association with courtly refinement endured. By the 1800s, illustrated beauty guides for noble families showed young girls dabbing creamy snail essence beneath their eyes and around their mouths, areas where fine lines might betray age or stress. Even today, traditional Korean medicine occasionally references chamuri, or golden snail, in recipes for glowing skin. There's a curious ritual tied to the Korean harvest festival of Chuseok. In some regions, women would leave bowls of sliced fruit near snail enclosures, believing that snails fed during this auspicious season produced more potent mucin. The fruit offerings were both a gesture of gratitude and a bribe for better secretion, sweet in a slightly unsettling way. And what did it feel like? Descriptions from surviving texts vary. Some say the slime felt cooling and luxurious. Others claim it tingled like a breeze on damp skin. The truth probably depends on the formulation, whether it was mixed with peppermint as some did, or if applied raw straight from the snail's trail. Either way, one common theme appears again and again: softness. The mucin left the skin feeling smooth, resilient, and, most importantly, youthful. One rare account from a court lady's diary recounts a day when the queen's mucin jar shattered, leaving nothing but a slick mess on the floor. Rather than waste it, several attendants reportedly scooped it up with their bare hands and massaged it onto their own faces, giggling in delight. Whether it's true or just a tale told to illustrate devotion to the ritual, it paints a vivid picture. Beauty so precious, even a spill becomes sacred. Of course, not everyone was thrilled about the trend. Certain Confucian scholars criticised what they saw as vanity in the royal court, warning that an overemphasis on physical beauty could distract from virtue. Others simply couldn't stomach the idea of slimy things crawling across faces in the name of allure. But like many beauty rituals, the trend endured precisely because it walked the line between the natural and the magical. In a more spiritual sense, the snail also represented patience and transformation, two qualities idealised in Joseon femininity. To wear its mucin was to embody these traits, to glow with the resilience of something slow but unstoppable. And really, isn't that the perfect metaphor? a slow-moving, overlooked creature transforming into the secret weapon of queens. Hidden power in a trail of slime. The court might be a place of whispers and politics, but under the surface, literally snails were helping to shape the face of royalty. Fast forward to today, and Snail Mushin has made a miraculous comeback. Bottled neatly, sterilised, scented and reformulated, it lines the shelves of luxury skincare brands. But the story often begins there, as a modern discovery. Few know the ritual's ancient origins. Fewer still imagine a moonlit palace, where a queen closes her eyes and lets nature in all its stickiness do the work. So the next time you gently pat a snail serum into your cheeks and marvel at that dewy finish, remember, you're sharing secrets with women who ruled empires, negotiated treaties, and endured layers of silk and expectation. And if a little slime helped them shine brighter, who are we to argue? In the crowded villas of ancient Rome, where marble pillars rose above sun-baked courtyards and fountains whispered secrets in Latin, beauty was serious business. Not just a passing whim, but an identity. One built through rituals as bold as they were bizarre. And for Roman noblewomen, especially those of the senatorial and imperial classes, one of the boldest beauty moves involved fire. More specifically, using flames to remove facial hair. Now, let's set the scene. It's mid-morning in a patrician household. Light spills through latticed windows. An attendant, young and focused, enters with a brass tray. On it, a curved bronze rod and a small oil lamp already flickering. Today, the lady of the house has requested a depilation session. A common but quietly nerve-wracking affair. She reclines, eyes shut, as the attendant carefully lights the tip of the rod and begins to hover it millimetres above her face. The goal? To singe away every tiny hair from her cheeks, chin and upper lip without so much as a scorch. This process, known as vellus hair removal by cautery, required remarkable precision. The tool was sometimes called a volsella, or calamistrum, though the terminology varies. In many cases it resembled a flattened wand with a fine, heated edge. It wasn't pressed against the skin. Instead, it hovered close enough to burn the hair while avoiding contact. A good operator could eliminate peach fuzz while leaving the skin smooth and intact. A clumsy one? Well, let's just say not every beauty session ended without the scent of burning eyebrows. So why go through such a risky ritual? Because Roman society was obsessed with smoothness. Hairlessness, especially on the face, signalled refinement, self-control and social superiority. Hairy women were mocked in satire, depicted as barbaric or foreign. Smooth skin was not only beautiful, it was Roman. This preoccupation wasn't confined to the elite. Even middle-class women sought facial hair removal, though they might resort to less dramatic means. Tweezers, abrasive pumice stones, or depilatory creams made from arsenic and quicklime. But for the upper crust, fire was considered the most effective. Painful, occasionally, dangerous, certainly, but efficient. Oh, absolutely. Elite Roman women often had live-in beauty specialists, ornatrices, trained in the arts of hairstyling, cosmetics and skincare. A truly prized ornatrix could remove facial fuzz with fire 1 minute and sculpt intricate braids the next. Her tools, meticulously maintained, were stored in polished boxes alongside perfumes, unguents, and powdered lead. Historians still argue over whether this flame-based method was performed daily or reserved for special occasions. Some believe women singed their faces regularly to maintain their polished appearance. Others think it was an occasional procedure, followed by soothing balms made from rose oil or goat's milk to calm any irritation. In either case, it was a testament to how far Roman women went in their quest to reflect ideals of beauty. Ideals shaped by poets, statues and gods. And it wasn't limited to the face. Roman writers describe full-body hair removal as part of high-status grooming. But the face, being visible at dinner parties, religious ceremonies and court appearances, was the most scrutinised. If a woman had a shadow of upper lip hair, scandalous. Better to brave the heat than face the whispers. A fringe belief held that the smell of burnt hair carried spiritual energy. Some households collected singed hairs and placed them in tiny urns, believing they could ward off the evil eye or bring good fortune. One unearthed mosaic even depicts a woman in profile. Her face. The process wasn't without its critics. Philosophers like Seneca and Juvenal scoffed at women who worshipped the flame more than the household gods. but their disdain was less about safety and more about what they saw as vanity. The irony, of course, is that many Roman men also practiced facial hair removal, though typically through shaving or plucking. Still, the fire method remained uniquely feminine, wrapped in both mystique and risk. One curious anecdote from Pliny the Elder's Natural History mentions a noblewoman who claimed that flame singing not only removed hair but improved her memory. Likely apocryphal, but it shows how even back then, beauty and pseudoscience went hand in hand. Maybe the heat was meant to clear the air between the skin and the mind. Or maybe she just liked how she looked afterward and felt smarter because of it. For women preparing for weddings, religious rites, or political dinners, smooth skin wasn't optional, it was expected. Brides were often treated to full-body singeing the night before the ceremony, accompanied by songs, herbs, and scented oils. Think bridal spa day, but with open flame. And yes, things occasionally went wrong. Records mention burn marks of vanity suffered by women whose ornithracies were too eager or too shaky. These scars, though socially embarrassing, were also oddly respected. They meant the woman had made the ultimate sacrifice for beauty, like a badge of honour, or perhaps a cautionary tale. In public art, Roman women are depicted with impossibly smooth skin, their faces gleaming under veils or wreaths. Statues too reflected these ideals, carved with skin like marble, unmarred by stubble or shadow. Of course, real people didn't look like that, but they tried. Oh, did they try? The use of fire in Roman beauty rituals is a reminder of just how far people have always gone for control over their appearance. It's also a glimpse into a culture that equated beauty with moral virtue. Smooth skin wasn't just attractive, it was a sign of discipline, hygiene, and Romanness. And perhaps there's something defiant in it too. In a society where women had limited political power, controlling their image became a form of agency. Choosing when and how to appear perfect, even at risk of a small burn, was a kind of self-authorship. Today, we wax, laser, and thread our way to smoothness, often with much the same goals. But imagine holding a lit bronze wand to your cheek every morning, your pulse steady, your mirror polished, your assistant whispering encouragement, the courage, the vanity, the smoke. So if your skincare routine ever feels a bit extra, just remember, ancient Roman queens flirted with fire and called it elegance. The chamber is quiet, too quiet. Early morning sun slants across tapestries and gilded mirrors, but the royal attendants move softly, as though tiptoeing around a secret. A silver pitcher gleams beside a porcelain basin, steam curling gently from its rim, and floating in that warm, clear liquid is the most controversial ingredient in the Queen's beauty arsenal, her own urine. Yes, you heard that correctly. In Renaissance Europe, and in particular among the queens and noblewomen of Italy, France and Spain, washing one's face with morning urine was not some bizarre rumour. It was a deeply held belief in natural purification, an early toner, if you will, long before rosewater and witch hazel arrived on the scene. To the modern nose, this might seem utterly revolting, but let's pause for a moment and imagine the context. The Renaissance was an age of rediscovery, when classical knowledge mingled with new ideas and alchemy blurred into medicine. Physicians, apothecaries, and beauty advisors took cues from ancient Greek and Roman texts, some of which praised the golden elixir for its cleansing and antibacterial properties. Hippocrates himself, often quoted centuries later, had once noted that urine could be used to treat wounds and skin disorders. So for the women of the courts, especially those with access to private bath chambers and full-time attendants, washing with urine, particularly the first morning batch, wasn't just accepted, it was recommended. Here's how it worked. Each morning, before the queen broke her fast or was seen by the court, a trusted handmaiden would collect her urine in a delicate vessel, usually ceramic or silver-lined. While still warm, it was poured into a shallow basin, sometimes mixed with a drop of rose oil or a pinch of lavender buds to mask the odour. A linen cloth, softened through repeated washing, was dipped into the mixture and gently dabbed across the face, neck, and chest. The idea was that urine, having filtered through the body overnight, contained trace minerals and natural ammonia, which helped strip away oils, exfoliate dead skin, and fight blemishes. It was, in a twisted way, a budget-friendly and sustainable beauty product, custom formulated by your own body. But don't mistake this for a peasant's trick. This was high fashion, embraced by queens like Elizabeth of Valois, Isabella d'Este, and even rumoured by some to be favoured by Catherine de' Medici herself. One court diary, now preserved in a Florentine archive, describes a morning routine wherein the Queen's golden cleanse was followed by a layer of ground pearl cream and a brisk brushing of the hair with boar bristles. A small price to pay, they said, for skin that shone like polished alabaster under torchlight. Naturally, not everyone was convinced. Some advisers objected, citing spiritual cleanliness or the indignity of the act. But others, particularly those immersed in the blossoming field of natural sciences, argued for its benefits. Alchemists claimed that urine, when left to age for a few days, transformed into a more potent elixir with bleaching qualities. Some queens would have jars stored in cool, dark corners of their chambers, essentially a curated collection of past vintages, aged like fine wine. It gets even stranger. A fringe faction of Renaissance beauty experts believed that urine from children, especially prepubescent boys, was more potent due to its purity. Though this practice was more common among apothecaries than royalty, whispers persisted that certain noblewomen sourced their cleansing solution from the household's youngest male servants. A disturbing thought, to be sure, but one that reflects the extremes of beauty ideology at the time. And it wasn't just facial cleansing. Some queens used urine in full-body scrubs, combining it with fine ash or salt for a rudimentary exfoliant. Others used it to bleach facial hair or lighten freckles, both traits considered unfashionable in certain circles. One recipe in a 16th century Venetian beauty manual even recommends boiling stale urine with rosemary to create a clarifying rinse for golden hair. So, how did it feel? Descriptions vary. Some say the sensation was oddly cooling, particularly when mixed with herbs. Others mention a faint stinging on blemished skin, a sign that the ammonia was doing its job. But the most consistent report was the after effect, a taut matte finish that resisted the heavy powders and pigments applied later in the morning. What did it smell like? Well, there's no sugar-coating it. It wasn't pleasant. That's where perfumed oils and sachets came in. After the ritual, queens would apply a floral balm, or wear scented gloves to mask any lingering aroma. Attendants burned myrrh or orange peels in the corners of the room, not just for ambiance, but to keep the queen's aura sweet-smelling. Still, the practice wasn't without risk. If improperly stored or used during illness, urine could harbour bacteria, leading to rashes or worse. Some physicians warned against the habit, noting cases where overzealous use led to chemical burns or chronic skin irritation. But in a world without antibiotics, preservatives or pH-balanced moisturisers, this was considered a natural self-sustaining alternative. Historians still argue over how widespread this ritual really was. Some suggest it was limited to certain regions, Italy and Spain in particular, while others believe it was more common than records suggest, kept discreet by the women who practiced it. After all, these routines weren't always shared publicly. Much like today's skincare secrets, they were passed quietly between mothers, daughters and ladies' maids. A particularly charming, if slightly questionable tale from a Spanish court describes a queen who brought her own ceramic urine jug on diplomatic travels, insisting no one else's formula worked quite the same. Whether out of superstition or a belief in personal pH levels, the idea of urine as skincare had become not just accepted but personalised. Like matching your skin tone to your foundation, only with a lot more awkwardness. The ritual may have faded with time, replaced by more fragrant toners and imported luxury products, but its echo lingers in folk remedies and fringe wellness circles even today. A surprising number of historical figures, including Leonardo da Vinci, mention the potential of bodily fluids in scientific journals, blurring the line between curiosity and cosmetic application. It's easy to laugh now, to wrinkle your nose and feel grateful for modern serums, salicylic acid, and micellar water. But there's something undeniably human in the lengths these women went to feel beautiful, to hold on to youth and control, even if it meant dabbing their cheeks with something their bodies had already thrown out. Because beneath all the velvet and lace, past the pearls and painted fans, Renaissance queens were just people, desperate for good skin and willing to try anything once, even if it meant washing their face with pee. The candlelight flickers across the carved mirror frame as the Duchess leans in, her irises reflecting the flame like twin suns. Her maid stands by with a tiny dropper, shaking slightly as she holds the delicate vial. Inside, a clear, glistening liquid swirls like moonlight caught in a bottle. It's beautiful, it's seductive, it's poison, and the Duchess is about to place it directly into her eyes. Welcome to the darkly alluring world of deadly nightshade, Atropa belladonna, a plant both feared and adored in Renaissance Italy, where women of the court used its toxic extract as an eye drop to dilate their pupils and make their gaze appear large, soft and haunting. The name belladonna means beautiful lady, and for centuries it lived up to its name, though always with a catch. In an age when the line between medicine and magic was razor thin, belladonna became a favourite of noble women, seeking the edge in a society obsessed with appearance. Wide, glossy pupils were considered seductive, an involuntary sign of arousal or admiration. Painters immortalised this aesthetic, and poets swooned over eyes, darkened with mystery, gleaming like midnight. But in the courts of Venice, Florence and Milan, women weren't leaving this to nature. They were dripping death into their eyes, one trembling drop at a time. The drops worked by paralysing the muscles that constrict the pupils, forcing them to dilate and remain unnaturally wide. The effect was immediate and dazzling. Under torchlight the eyes gleamed unnaturally, turning every glance into a languorous, heavy-lidded swoon. But the side effects were brutal: blurred vision, headaches, light sensitivity, and over time permanent eye damage or even blindness. Still, the ritual persisted. Court ladies, particularly those manoeuvring for favour or marriage, considered belladonna drops a secret weapon. In a world where men could rise through warfare, politics and property, women had fewer tools, and their appearance was often one of them. The application itself was a tense affair. Belladonna was made by steeping the leaves and berries in alcohol, then straining the mixture through cloth to create a thin, potent liquid. The resulting tincture was highly unstable, too strong, and it could induce hallucinations or cardiac arrest, too weak, and the pupils barely responded. Measuring the dose was a kind of art, performed by trusted handmaidens or personal apothecaries with steady hands and stronger nerves. And yes, there were accidents. One Venetian diarist records a noblewoman who applied too much belladonna before a masquerade and collapsed into unconsciousness before the dancing even began. Another tale, half rumour, half warning, tells of a duchess who could no longer see clearly after years of use, forced to navigate the palace halls with a servant at each elbow. They said she was still beautiful, but blind as a marble statue. Not surprisingly, scholars continue to debate the prevalence of this practice. Was it truly widespread among Italian nobility, or limited to a fashionable few in the most opulent cities? Some argue that belladonna use was more symbolic than statistical, a kind of urban legend amplified by artists and satirists. But contemporary beauty guides and apothecary manuals do mention La Bella Goccia, or the beautiful drop, alongside recipes for rosewater washes and powdered pearl creams. And belladonna wasn't limited to eye drops. Some women used it in skin tonics, hoping to achieve a faint flush or warmth in their cheeks. Others dabbed it on the tongue before romantic encounters to loosen inhibitions, again walking a thin line between chemistry and catastrophe. A few particularly daring courtesans reportedly mixed it with wine to deepen the evening, though whether this led to poetry or panic is anyone's guess. What fascinates most is how normalised this danger became. In Letters Between Noblewomen, belladonna is described in the same breath as lace trims and hair oils. Just another item in the vanity case. The fact that it could cause hallucinations, fever or death. A footnote: vanity, it seems, is the oldest thrill-seeker. Of course, some rejected the practice. Religious reformers decried it as sinful, even demonic. After all, nightshade belonged to a family of plants associated with witches, death, and the occult. In darker corners of Europe, it was used in flying ointments and love potions, ingredients tied to pagan rituals and feared by the church. But in Italy's sun-drenched palaces, belladonna was less about witchcraft and more about wooing the room. There's also a philosophical angle. Renaissance thinkers were captivated by the idea that beauty might contain poison, and that love, like belladonna, could both elevate and destroy. The metaphors practically wrote themselves. A drop of desire, a blindness that follows. Some poets even praised women who used the drops, comparing their gazes to torches that burn without mercy. It wasn't just appearance, it was performance, a dangerous, deliberate play of power. One lesser-known figure in this world was Isabella d'Aragona, a Milanese duchess with a reputation for style and ruthlessness. Rumours swirled that she kept a private garden filled with medicinal plants, including a patch of carefully cultivated belladonna. Her servants were trained to recognise its berries, not to eat, but to distill. She wore no rouge, no powder, but her eyes, they said, could make kings lose track of time, and it's not entirely impossible. The dilation effect from belladonna made pupils huge and dark, eliminating much of the iris. This gave the illusion of depth, mystery, and emotional openness. In a society where women were often seen and not heard, such visual intensity could wield real influence, turning a glance into a negotiation, a look into a lure. Interestingly, belladonna's name, Atropa, comes from Atropos, one of the 3 Greek fates, known for cutting the thread of life. Fitting then that so many women flirted with death by dropper, trying to extend their prime by borrowing beauty from a plant associated with endings. Modern historians, when analysing court records and medicinal inventories, have found clear evidence of belladonna in noble households. Sometimes it appears coded, listed under euphemisms like herb of the moon or veil root tincture. One Florence-based chemist from the 1500s was known for his whisper vials, small unlabelled bottles hand-delivered to the homes of high-ranking women. Payment was always discreet, and no refunds. As the centuries passed, the use of belladonna shifted from beauty tool to legitimate medicine, used in small controlled doses for pain relief, muscle spasms and surgical procedures. But its dark beauty legacy lingers. Even now, pupil dilation is seen as an involuntary signal of attraction, echoes of those dangerous drops whispering through our subconscious. And perhaps that's the enduring power of the belladonna ritual. Not the chemical, but the choice. A woman standing before a mirror, aware of the risk and deciding to glow a little brighter, to gaze a little deeper, to wield her own mystery, even if it costs her sight. So next time someone says, "Beauty is pain," remember the women who literally dripped poison into their eyes for a single glance that could change everything. The sound is soft, almost melodic, a gentle tapping of fingers against ceramic as the attendant stirs a creamy paste. Outside, the cherry blossoms are in bloom, their petals fluttering across the palace gardens like a living snow. Inside, within the inner chambers of a Kyoto villa, a high-ranking court lady leans back as her face is slowly painted with what might be the most unconventional face mask in all of East Asia, bird droppings. To be more specific, nightingale droppings. Known in Japan as a guisu no fun, this pale, powdered substance was highly prized among geishas and court women during the Heian and Edo periods. Applied as a facial mask, it promised to lighten the skin, clear away blemishes, and impart a soft, pearlescent finish beloved by noble society. And for many generations it did exactly that, assuming you could get past the source. Nightingales were not just admired for their sweet calls echoing through the bamboo forests. Their digestive process was considered uniquely clean, at least compared to other birds. They were often fed a controlled diet of seeds and mulberries, which supposedly made their droppings less offensive and more consistent in texture. Qualities essential for high-end skincare, naturally. The process of turning poop into paste wasn't as unrefined as it sounds. The droppings were collected and carefully dried under UV light, in modern versions, or sun-dried in open-air screens in traditional practice. Once completely desiccated, they were ground into a fine powder, almost odourless, and then mixed with rice bran or water to create a smooth cream. This was then applied to the face using soft brushes or silk cloths. In the context of Heian court culture, where aesthetics ruled every aspect of life, from calligraphy strokes to the layering of robes, the face was a canvas. Pale skin wasn't just fashionable, it was sacred. It signified purity, intellect and refinement, and women often blackened their teeth, ohaguro, and plucked their eyebrows to draw new ones higher on the forehead, elongating the face. Within this beauty framework, the nightingale mask was one more tool, albeit a pungent one, in the endless pursuit of perfection. The treatment itself was often part of a larger bathing ritual. A noblewoman would sit for hours as her attendants massaged camellia oil into her scalp, scrubbed her back with azuki bean paste, and prepared her skin for the mask. Once applied, the nightingale mixture dried to a light crust, tightening the skin. It was then rinsed off with warm water infused with chrysanthemum or green tea, leaving behind a luminous finish. But how effective was it really? Modern dermatology lends a surprising nod of approval. Nightingale droppings contain guanine, a natural compound that reflects light, giving the skin a pearly glow. They also include urea and enzymes like guanosine, which can help exfoliate and break down dead skin cells. So, while the idea of smearing bird poop on your face might seem medieval at best, the science behind the glow holds up, and the tradition didn't die with the shoguns. During Japan's Meiji era and beyond, the practice evolved into a spa service known as the geisha facial. Some Tokyo salons still offer it today, fully sanitized and discreetly scented, of course, marketed to beauty tourists chasing ancient secrets. Even certain Hollywood celebrities have reportedly tried it, proving that strange beauty rituals never truly disappear. They just get rebranded. Historians still debate when exactly the practice began. Some place its origins in the Heian period, 794 to 1185, when aristocrats began placing greater emphasis on cosmetic ritual. Others argue it wasn't until the Edo period, 1603 to 1868, when geishas rose to cultural prominence, that the practice became widespread. Fringe scholars even suggest it might have originated in Korea or China before arriving in Japan, though definitive proof remains elusive. One fascinating theory links the rise of the Nightingale mask to the theatrical Kabukian No performances of the Edo era. Performers wore thick white makeup that clogged the pores and left the skin inflamed after each show. Bird droppings, with their natural enzymes, helped remove stubborn pigment and soothe irritation. If it worked for actors on stage, surely it could work for nobles behind closed doors. Court diaries and beauty scrolls often include references to the mask, though never in vulgar terms. Instead, euphemisms like morning dew treatment or white feather extract were used, poetic attempts to reframe the experience. The act of applying the mask became something almost meditative, a pause in the day for self-reflection and quiet, however bizarre the ingredients. One noblewoman's account from the early 18th century details her lifelong use of the treatment, crediting it for the tranquil moonlight sheen of her skin well into old age. Whether that's exaggeration or marketing, we'll never know, but her beauty rituals were passed down through her daughters and noted in family journals, an inheritance of droppings, if you will. Still, not everyone approved. Buddhist monks, especially those focused on ascetic living, frowned upon such indulgences. Some temple texts mock noblewomen for painting their faces with forest refuse, framing the practice as vanity run amok. And yet even some temples used bird droppings, though more for medicinal poultices than aesthetics, so the moral high ground gets a little slippery. Another peculiar footnote: certain nightingales were considered more effective than others. Birds raised near Mount Yoshino, a region famed for its cherry blossoms, were said to produce droppings with extra spiritual radiance. Whether this was based on diet, altitude, or sheer superstition is unclear, but it created an entire microeconomy of nightingale farms, complete with birdhouses, screens, and full-time handlers. One particularly wealthy Kyoto family reportedly kept a rooftop aviary just for their beauty regimen. The birds were pampered with music and plum blossoms, and their droppings harvested daily by a specially trained servant. The height of luxury, perhaps, or just another example of how far humans will go to look like porcelain. And make no mistake, status mattered. Ordinary women could not afford this treatment regularly, as the collection and preparation were labour-intensive. For them, rice water or bean masks were more common. Only the elite, with access to trained birds and skilled attendants, could afford to smear purified excrement across their cheeks and call it skincare. But within that privileged class, the nightingale mask became a kind of beauty arms race. The more delicate your glow, the more dedicated your routine. And if that meant your vanity cabinet smelled vaguely of a forest floor after rain, so be it. Today, the thought still makes people giggle or grimace. Yet deep down, there's admiration too. These women embraced what worked, no matter how unconventional. They weren't afraid to get a little dirty in their pursuit of elegance. In fact, they turned dirt into dignity, bird poop into prestige. So the next time someone tells you beauty is only skin deep, remind them that, in Japan's royal courts, true beauty was feathered, fermented, and applied with grace. The glow was real. The bird was listening. The mirror lies flat on the table, its surface polished obsidian, dark as midnight and barely reflective. But that doesn't matter. Queen Elizabeth. I doesn't need to see her face to know that every inch of it must be concealed. Coated, hidden beneath a veil of white. Her ritual begins not with powder or rouge, but with a paste. Thick, cold, deadly. a concoction so ingrained in her legacy that its name echoes through centuries, Venetian ceruse. At first glance it sounds elegant. Ceruse, a fine white pigment made from lead carbonate, had been used in painting and cosmetics for centuries. Venetian implied refinement, imported luxury, a link to the Renaissance's most fashionable republic. But behind the romance lurked one of the most toxic beauty products ever devised. Elizabeth didn't invent the use of ceruse, but she perfected its image. After smallpox left her with facial scarring in her late 20s, she turned to the white mask as both concealment and weapon. The blindingly pale face became her signature, a symbol of power, untouchability, and eternal youth. Court painters exaggerated it, poets praised it, and the women around her scrambled to imitate it, no matter the cost. Making Venetian ceruse was an alchemical nightmare. White lead was produced by placing lead strips over vinegar in sealed pots, then burying them in dung heaps to speed the reaction. After weeks of fermentation, the corroded lead was scraped into a fine powder, then rinsed and dried. What remained was a soft, chalky pigment, pure white, easily blended with rosewater or oil into a paste. To the untrained eye, it was perfection in a jar. Every morning, Elizabeth's ladies-in-waiting would stir the mixture and apply it to her face with linen pads or small spatulas. Layer by layer, they built a smooth white facade, covering not just scars but freckles, veins, and every trace of pink. Her lips were painted with vermilion, her cheeks with a hint of cochineal, but the base was always ceruse, luminous, lifeless, and unyielding. To modern viewers, her portraits appear ghostly, almost spectral, but in her time this look signified aristocracy. Pale skin meant wealth, the absence of labour, the refinement of indoor living. A tanned face was for peasants. A white face was for queens. And yet the irony is hard to miss. The more ceruse a woman wore, the more damage it caused. The lead was absorbed through the skin, disrupting the nervous system, corroding the flesh, and causing tremors, hair loss, and in extreme cases, death. But rather than discouraging use, the side effects often pushed women deeper into dependence. Skin irritated by lead would become red and inflamed, so they'd apply more ceruse to cover the blemishes. A vicious, powdery cycle. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth was aware of the danger. Some say she knew and chose image over health. Others believe the connection between ceruse and illness wasn't understood until much later. Either way, her use became legend. Even in her final years, as her health declined and her hair thinned, she refused to appear in public without her painted mask. It wasn't just the English court either. Ceruse spread across Europe like wildfire. In France, Catherine de' Medici's court adopted it with fervour. In Spain, noblewomen competed for the palest complexion. In the Netherlands, artists used ceruse in portraits to idolise their subjects. Everyone wanted to look like marble, but Elizabeth was its most famous face, and her commitment to the look transformed it into a political symbol. The white mask wasn't just cosmetic, it was armour. She was the Virgin Queen, untouchable, unchanging, eternal. Beneath that mask, she could be anyone, or no one. There's even a peculiar anecdote from one of her final years. Visitors to court noted that she refused to eat in public, fearing that removing her mask to take a bite would reveal too much. Some say she only drank thin broths or wine at events. Her face kept rigid and unsmiling to prevent cracks in the paint. Others claim she slept sitting upright, her mask untouched, ready for any surprise audience. The process of removal was equally punishing. Ceruse didn't just wipe off. It had to be scrubbed with vinegar, almond oil, or even mild abrasives like pumice. Each night, Elizabeth likely endured a miniature battle, stripping away the day's face only to begin again in the morning. Some nights, it's said, she didn't bother. One apocryphal story tells of an attendant who once attempted to clean her face too roughly, and was dismissed on the spot. The Queen, even in her declining years, demanded control over every inch of her image. But not all queens embraced ceruse. In parts of Eastern Europe, naturalistic beauty was still admired, and in Ottoman harems, skincare revolved around oils and clays rather than pigment. Still, the Western obsession with whiteness persisted, fueled by art, commerce, and a deep cultural fear of aging. In fact, the ceruse craze was so widespread that counterfeit versions emerged. Apothecaries sold chalk-based knockoffs to lower-ranking women. while others used lead mixed with mercury for extra sheen. These adulterated mixtures were often more dangerous than the original, and cases of paint poisoning were occasionally recorded in death registers, though often euphemistically labelled as nervous decline or female ailment. A fringe theory suggests that Elizabeth's dramatic transformation into the ghost-like figure of her later portraits wasn't just cosmetic but psychological. As her court demanded more perfection, she leaned harder into the mask, becoming, in a sense, the image her people expected. A monarch made not of flesh and blood, but of lead and legend. Today, scientists can detect ceruse residue in burial remains, its lead signature lingering centuries later in the bones of noblewomen. It's a chilling reminder of the lengths people once went to become beautiful, knowing perhaps that beauty could kill. Still, the appeal of the mask is strangely timeless. Even now we use concealers, foundation, colour correctors, all to blur, conceal, erase. The difference is only one of chemistry. The instinct remains. So the next time you see a portrait of Elizabeth Offens, her skin glowing like moonlight on marble, look closer. Behind that flawless face is a woman who risked everything, her health, her identity, even her humanity, for a look that would outlast her crown. The White Queen didn't just wear her beauty, she weaponized it, and she paid the price. The Queen sits patiently as the maid removes her velvet hood, revealing thick, glossy hair that tumbles like liquid darkness over her shoulders. The maid's hands, wrapped in linen gloves, move with care. They know the next step in this royal routine is not for the faint of heart. From a jar, the maid lifts a small spoonful of golden green slime. Ox gall, the bile of slaughtered cattle, simmered into a hair treatment so prized in medieval courts that it became a trade secret whispered among noble families. Ox gall, in all its slippery splendour, was the unlikely cornerstone of shiny hair in the Middle Ages. While soap was harsh and often avoided, and shampoo as we know it didn't exist, queens and high-born women needed an answer to the ever-present problem of dull, greasy, unmanageable locks. Enter the gallbladder of an ox, specifically its bile, carefully collected and boiled with herbs, eggs and rosewater, until it transformed into a surprisingly effective conditioner. At first, the use of bile in beauty might seem absurd, even grotesque, but medieval science, based on Galenic theory and alchemy, saw bodily fluids, both human and animal, as sources of vital energy. Ox gall, being pungent, rare, and from a beast of strength, was believed to transfer some of its power to the user. Combined with rosewater, honey or mint, it was not only bearable, but, by medieval standards, luxurious. The Queen's treatment would begin with a hair wash using warm rainwater infused with dried chamomile and barley. Then came the ox gall solution, carefully combed through the strands and left to sit beneath a warm towel or cap. After 30 minutes, it was rinsed with another herbal infusion, nettle for dark hair, lemon balm for lighter tones. The results, by all surviving accounts, astonishing. Hair came out smoother, shinier and easier to braid or coil. In court portraits and manuscripts, noblewomen often appear with gleaming tresses that frame their pale faces like halos, a detail not always imagined, but often earned through careful and, yes, rather slimy effort. Ox gall wasn't just a conditioner. It doubled as a scalp treatment, believed to stimulate circulation and ward off lice. In an age when bathing was infrequent and perfumed powders masked more than they cleaned, a solution that added shine and prevented scalp itch was worth its weight in, well, gall. But it wasn't easy to come by. Gallbladders had to be harvested fresh, typically from oxen raised on specific diets to sweeten the bile. Butchers sometimes sold them directly to palace kitchens, where the bile would be strained and stored in dark glass jars. Spoiled gall was useless. Bitter, too acidic, or worse, clumpy. Only the freshest bile would do. Some recipes even added crushed pearls, beeswax, or crushed violets to enhance the effect. For special occasions, feasts, coronations, weddings, the mixture might be simmered for hours with white wine, transforming it into a thick, fragrant balm that left hair not just gleaming but subtly scented. And the queens weren't alone. Kings used it too, especially those with flowing locks or beards they wanted to tame. Emperor Frederick II reportedly kept ox gall in his travelling beauty chest, along with a comb made from ivory and a tiny spoon for application. One account from his court notes that he smelled of pine resin and mint even in war, likely thanks to a gall mixture thick with herbs. Yet not all reactions were positive. Some religious texts warned against vanity, condemning women who soak their scalps in the fluids of beasts. Monastic writers mocked the practice, calling it indulgent, even sinful. One monk from northern France penned a letter describing a noblewoman whose hair shone like glass but stank like the butcher's floor. A vivid image, if a bit unfair. Still the practice endured, especially among women whose hair was part of their mystique. In love poetry and ballads, hair was often described as luminous, cascading, or scented, a direct reflection of how much care went into its appearance. A queen with dull or tangled hair risked more than just gossip. In courtly love culture, appearance equalled status. A silky mane could win hearts, or command armies. Fringe beliefs even tied hair gloss to fertility. A sheen was thought to reflect a woman's inner vitality, her body's balance of humours, and even her future children's strength. Mothers passed down recipes for gall-based treatments like heirlooms. In some noble houses, servants were taught to prepare the rinse before they learned to serve wine. One rare document from Burgundy details a wedding preparation list that includes ox gall balm, strained thrice, and stirred with almond milk for Lady Isabeau's hair. The attention to detail is staggering, and suggests just how embedded this slimy concoction was in elite grooming. Still, ox gall had its drawbacks. Improper storage could turn it rancid, leading to infections or an unfortunate stench. Some queens reportedly added vinegar or salt to preserve the mix. Others entrusted only their closest attendants with its preparation, fearing sabotage or embarrassment. By the time the Renaissance rolled in, ox gall began to lose its dominance. Soap formulations improved, perfumed oils became fashionable, and new ingredients like imported coconut oil began to appear. But gall didn't vanish entirely. Artists even used it as a binder in watercolours, giving hair yet another artistic legacy, painted and powdered onto parchment. And yet, the metaphor endures. Even today, people describe hair as slick, glossy, or bouncy, qualities once achieved by soaking it in the bile of farm animals. The ancient quest for shine never left us. It just got better marketing. Modern conditioners promise the same lustre using chemistry instead of livestock, but the echoes remain. The layering, the careful application, the secret formulas passed down. These are the fingerprints of ancient beauty rituals still clinging to our vanity shelves. So the next time your conditioner boasts shine-enhancing or nourishing oils, think back to the medieval queen reclining with her hair soaked in ox bile, staring out the castle window and wondering whether this time her tresses would catch the light just right. Because in her world, to shine was to rule. And even if it meant reaching into the guts of a beast, she wasn't going to leave her hair to chance. The incense curls lazily through the temple air, mingling with the warm metallic tang of crushed minerals and perfume. Somewhere in the background a harp is plucked, slow and deliberate. But the queen, an Egyptian daughter of Ra, draped in linens finer than clouds, is focused not on music nor worship, but on her reflection. She lifts a thin reed applicator and carefully draws it across her eyelids, leaving a glimmering trail. The shimmer catches the light, and for a fleeting moment, her eyes glow like starlight. What creates that celestial sparkle? Fish scales. That's right. The otherworldly glitter that graced the faces of ancient Egyptian royalty came not from gemstones or stardust, but from the shiny, iridescent fragments of fish skin, painstakingly collected, dried, ground, and applied with the precision of a priest offering to the gods. Cosmetics in ancient Egypt were never just about vanity. They were sacred tools, part of a spiritual and political ritual that turned the human body into an extension of divine order. Makeup wasn't an accessory, it was armour, and glittering eyelids were more than decoration. They were a message. The ingredients, meticulously curated. Fish scales, often taken from Nile species like tilapia or perch, were prized for their natural reflectivity. When dried and crushed, they produced a fine, pearlescent dust that shimmered like liquid gold or moonlit silver. Mixed with a base, usually animal fat, beeswax, or plant oils, this dust was turned into a malleable cream. The result was a product that not only sparkled but adhered well to skin in Egypt's unforgiving desert heat. Applying it was a meditative act. The queen or high priestess would sit before a polished copper mirror while her attendants gently dabbed the fish scale paste across her eyelids, brow bones, or even collarbones. It caught torchlight beautifully, giving the impression that the wearer glowed from within. Perfect for ceremonies, processions, or simply walking past lower-ranking courtiers in a blinding display of divinely sanctioned superiority. Modern scientists have confirmed that crushed fish scales, also known as guanine, create a powerful light-reflecting effect. Today it's used in everything from shampoo to nail polish, but for the Egyptians the effect was almost mystical. They believed light was life, and to reflect it was to possess a piece of divinity. A woman whose eyes sparkled was closer to Hathor, goddess of beauty and joy. A man who shimmered in battle was seen as blessed by Horus, and it wasn't just the eyes. Egyptian beauty rituals incorporated shimmer into body oils, salves, and hair treatments. Special preparations used for banquets and festivals often included fine metallic flecks alongside the fish scale dust. A queen entering a room under a canopy of torches might sparkle from head to toe, silent, regal, and radiant. As usual, this shimmering glory came with some less than glamorous logistics. Collecting the scales required careful work. After cleaning the fish, workers would scrape the scales, sun-dry them, and sift them through linen to isolate the iridescent parts. It took hundreds of fish to create a small jar of pigment, a process so labour-intensive that these shimmering powders were often stored in alabaster or gold containers, labelled with prayers to ensure they were never misused. Not surprisingly, this was a luxury product, reserved for queens, high priestesses, or the elite women of Pharaoh's court. Lower-class women used simpler eye paints, mostly coal made from galena or soot. Those who dared to imitate the sparkle without permission risked social backlash, or worse, divine punishment, at least according to some temple texts. Fringe scholars suggest that the use of fish scale shimmer might have originated from observing the Nile itself. As the river sparkled in sunlight, shimmering with schools of silver fish beneath its surface, it was interpreted as a living mirror of the gods. If the river sparkled, shouldn't the queen? After all, she was the embodiment of Ma'at, the principle of cosmic order. Another curious practice tied to this belief involved bathing in fish-infused oils. Some queens would soak in warm baths filled with water scented by crushed lotus and infused with boiled fish skins, believing this transferred the shimmer directly into their pores. Whether or not it worked, the symbolism was clear. She glowed because she ruled, and she ruled because she glowed. One intriguing debate among historians is whether Cleopatra herself used this method. While her famous eye makeup often emphasised bold coal lines and malachite green, some surviving jars from her era contain shimmering residues that match the guanine signature of fish scales. Whether she personally favoured the sparkle, or simply popularised its use in court, is still unknown. But considering her legendary flair for dramatics, it wouldn't be out of character. And as with many ancient beauty practices, this shimmer had a dual purpose. Beyond allure, it served as sun protection. The reflective particles helped bounce sunlight off the skin, much like early sunscreen. Combine this with coal's bug-repelling properties, and it becomes clear. Egyptian makeup was also remarkably practical. Still, practicality doesn't cancel out the weird factor. Imagine your beauty routine involving fish guts, drying racks, and careful sieving, all to produce a product you could accidentally sweat off in the unforgiving Egyptian heat. And yet, they did it, day after day, century after century. Because beauty wasn't optional, it was sacred performance. There are even accounts of special shimmer being applied to mummies during embalming. Certain high-status women had their faces dusted with guanine during the wrapping process, the belief being that they would carry their radiance into the afterlife, shine on, even in the underworld. Today, we might chuckle at the idea of harvesting Nile fish for eyeshadow, but we're not so different. The shimmer in many modern products, yes, even some drugstore highlighters, still comes from fish-derived guanine. It's labelled more discreetly now, but it's there. The glow of ancient queens flickering across cheeks and eyelids in the 21st century. So the next time your makeup catches the light just right, consider the women who came before you. The queens who crushed fish scales under the desert sun, who painted themselves not just to dazzle, but to embody the divine, who understood that sparkle wasn't superficial, it was survival. because in a world of gods and goddesses only the radiant rise. In the early morning hush of a wind-blown tent, the Queen's attendants prepare a mixture so thick and pungent it nearly overpowers the scent of incense wafting through the fabric walls. It bubbles quietly in a bronze cauldron, a frothy blend of oils, herbs, and an ingredient few would associate with high society: boiled animal fat. From the sands of the Sahara to the snowy forests of Scandinavia, women of nobility have long relied on rendered fat from animals as a cornerstone of their beauty rituals. Queens slathered their faces and bodies in rich creams made from camel hump, bear grease, goose fat, or even pig lard. Not because they lacked better options, but because, in their time, this was the best that nature could offer. It all begins with the fat itself. Harvested during butchering and carefully separated from muscle and sinew, the fat was rendered down slowly over low heat. This purification process removed impurities, creating a smooth, semi-solid balm that could be stored for months. Once cooled, the base became a blank canvas. Herbs, resins, and flowers were added not only to mask the meaty smell, but to enhance the skin benefits and infuse spiritual symbolism. In ancient Arabia, camel fat was revered for its moisture-sealing properties, essential in a desert climate where the wind and sun stripped skin dry within hours. Queen Zenobia of Palmyra, famed for her beauty and intellect, reportedly commissioned entire caravans to deliver camel fat rendered with rose oil, myrrh, and crushed sandalwood. She applied it each evening after her bath, her skin glistening under moonlight like a polished statue. Meanwhile, in the colder climates of medieval Russia and northern Europe, bear fat held legendary status. Thick and rich, it was perfect for protecting skin against the biting cold. Russian princesses mixed it with beeswax and pine sap to create a skin balm that repelled windburn and gave the face a healthy, dewy sheen. Some even believed it carried the spirit of the bear, granting strength, resilience, and a protective aura. The Inuit used seal and whale blubber for similar reasons, but with more practical intent than vanity. Still, among nobility, the use of fat was anything but mundane. It was ritualistic. Royalty didn't just moisturize, they anointed. One particularly vivid account from 13th century France describes Queen Blanche of Castile's nightly regimen. A blend of goose fat, marjoram, and powdered pearls massaged into her hands and cheeks, followed by a silk wrap to draw out impurities and infuse softness. The room was kept warm, the oils gently heated over a beeswax candle, and the balm applied by handmaidens with specially trained pressure techniques. But as one might expect, these concoctions didn't always smell pleasant. Even after adding floral oils and musks, a faint undertone of animal still lingered. To combat this, certain queens had personal perfumes made. Strong enough to override the smell, but soft enough to blend with it. One royal perfumer in 16th century Persia created an oil of damask rose and saffron, designed specifically to be worn atop a base of lamb tallow. Fringe scholars have found references to a beast balm used by Nubian queens, combining crocodile fat, ebony oil, and powdered carnelian stone. Believed to provide both sun protection and spiritual grounding, this mixture was applied before ceremonial processions. Some theorists argue it doubled as war paint, an armour of scent and shimmer. In ancient Greece, pig lard was the go-to. Women mixed it with honey and myrtle oil, then applied it with small spatulas carved from ivory or bone. The Greek goddess Aphrodite was often depicted anointing herself with such unguents, a reflection of beauty as divine discipline. Wealthy Athenian women stored their mixtures in alabaster pots etched with protective charms. And if a particular blend worked wonders, it was guarded like a state secret. But not everyone approved. Philosophers and early Christian writers frequently mocked the trend. They saw the use of animal fat as indulgent, even grotesque. One theologian wrote, "She who coats her cheeks in pig's grease has already devoured her soul." A bit dramatic, but it gives a sense of the moral resistance some beauty rituals provoked. Still, the rituals continued, generation after generation. In Elizabethan England, suet from mutton or beef was used as a base for scented creams. One famous blend, known as Queen's Delight, included sheep tallow, lemon peel, and ambergris. Rubbed onto the skin with silk pads until it warmed and vanished into the pores. Elizabeth I herself, ever loyal to Venetian Cyrus, may have used animal fat to soften her skin beneath the layers of lead paint. The psychological aspect of these balms can't be overstated. To anoint oneself in animal fat wasn't just cosmetic. It was transformational. It symbolized strength, endurance, and connection to the primal world. A queen who wore bear grease wasn't just protecting her skin. She was invoking the spirit of the hunt, the ferocity of the wild. Some regimens became so elaborate that their preparation resembled cooking more than cosmetics. Recipes were handed down, adjusted, and even written in code to protect their formulas. One Byzantine empress is said to have kept a fat-based cold cream that required 36 ingredients, including lion's marrow and snow-melted water collected during the winter solstice. And what did it feel like? According to scattered descriptions, these creams were dense but silky, warming slightly on contact with skin. They didn't absorb like modern moisturizers. Instead, they sat like a protective film, sealing in whatever lay beneath. Women often wore them overnight, wrapped in soft cloth or gauze to avoid soiling the pillows. By morning, the residue was wiped away and replaced with lighter, more fragrant daytime oils. Yet not all fats were created equal. Camel hump was considered cooling and hydrating. Goose fat was light and elegant. Bear grease, luxurious but thick. And then there were fringe experiments. Frog fat for inflammation, otter oil for hair gloss, even badger grease to heal scars. These more obscure practices likely remained in the realm of court apothecaries and bold experimenters rather than widespread trends. As beauty science evolved, these animal-based balms began to fade. The Enlightenment era brought skepticism. Industrialization offered alternatives. By the 19th century, paraffin, petroleum jelly and glycerin began to replace natural fats. But the legacy endured, layered in our lotions, echoed in our rituals. Even now, the concept of nourishing oils and rich creams carries the shadow of those primal formulas. We've swapped bear fat for shea butter, tallow for coconut oil, but the goal remains unchanged. To coat ourselves in protection, to soften the world's harsh edges, to preserve something fleeting. So next time you smooth a cream into your skin, consider the queens who came before you, those who stirred pots of bubbling fat under the stars, who scented their skin with forest and field, who dared to make elegance out of animal. Because sometimes beauty isn't delicate, sometimes it's bold, and sometimes it smells just a little bit wild. The sun sets over the Nile, casting golden light on the polished stone floor of a secluded chamber. Torches flicker to life. A breeze carries the scent of myrrh, lotus, and something stranger. The queen closes her eyes as an attendant anoints her wrists and throat with a thick, glistening oil, a scent so rich, so intoxicating, it has been steeped not only in perfume but in death. This, dear listener, is not just fragrance. It's embalming fluid. Yes, ancient Egyptian queens, and later noblewomen across the Mediterranean, used versions of embalming oils as perfume. These were not diluted knockoffs or perfumed salves inspired by mummification practices. In some cases, they were the very same concoctions, complex blends of resins, oils and spices used to preserve the dead, repurposed to enchant the living. It sounds grim, and it is. But to the ancient Egyptians, death was not a rupture but a continuation. The oils used in mummification weren't seen as morbid. They were sacred, transformative, even sensual. So when queens like Cleopatra dabbed them behind her ears before slipping into a banquet hall, she wasn't flirting with mortality, she was wearing eternity. Let's talk ingredients. The base was often a thick, sticky oil, cedar, myrrh or juniper, chosen for its preservative properties. To that, perfumers added layers of complexity. Cinnamon for warmth, frankincense for spiritual elevation, lotus for sweetness, and labdanum for muskiness. Some mixtures were so rich they had to be warmed by hand before application, the heat of the skin melting the resin just enough to release its scent. These oils clung to fabric, lingered in hair, and left trails of scent that could last for days. A queen wearing embalming oil didn't just smell memorable, she haunted the room. One famous recipe, known as kaifi, was burned in temples as incense but also applied to the body. A labour-intensive blend of wine-soaked raisins, honey, herbs, and resins. Kifi was associated with dreams, seduction, and divinity. Pharaohs had it massaged into their skin at night to soothe the soul. Queens wore it during ceremonies to invoke the favour of Isis. Archaeologists have discovered traces of these perfumed resins on royal mummy wrappings, leading to fascinating questions. Were these women anointed only in death? Or had they worn the same perfumes in life, so often and with such consistency, that the scent became part of their final essence? Historians still debate this. Some argue embalming oils were strictly ritualistic, never meant for daily use. Others point to scrolls and cosmetic jars found in queenly tombs, vessels shaped like lotus buds or scarabs, still clinging to the scent of myrrh centuries later, as evidence that the line between cosmetic and funerary oil was porous, perhaps non-existent. One curious tidbit: embalming oils were expensive, very expensive. Some required ingredients imported from India, Arabia, or even Nubia. Only the wealthiest elites could afford to use them casually. A jar of pure myrrh oil, for instance, could cost more than a year's wages for a craftsman. But for queens, cost wasn't the concern. Presence was. Wearing a perfume used on the dead was a statement. "I am more than flesh," it said. "I am beyond decay." And in a world where divine right and physical beauty were inseparable, smelling like eternity had its advantages. The application was as ceremonial as the scent. Oils were warmed slightly, then applied to the pulse points, wrists, neck, behind the ears, even the soles of the feet. This wasn't a quick spritz-and-go affair. It was an act of transformation. Some queens were massaged head to toe with these oils before major events, diplomatic meetings, temple dedications, royal marriages. One theory suggests that some of these embalming oils included trace amounts of antimicrobial compounds. In other words, not only did they smell amazing, they might have actually kept the skin healthy, or at least slowed decay. Whether this was understood scientifically or simply appreciated anecdotally remains unclear. What we do know is this: the scent was unforgettable. Roman visitors to Egypt often wrote about the overwhelming fragrance of Egyptian women. One famously complained that even their handmaidens smelled like the vaults of Osiris, a backhanded compliment if ever there was one. Cleopatra, ever the master of symbolic beauty, may have leaned into this association deliberately. Her own blend, it's said, was custom crafted to mimic the oils used in embalming: dense, resinous, lingering. Roman soldiers joked that she could be smelled before she was seen. No doubt this was intentional. When seduction and strategy overlap, scent is a powerful tool. And it wasn't just the Egyptians. As embalming techniques spread, so did the ingredients. In ancient Greece, noble women used diluted embalming oils in bath rituals. In Rome, funerary perfumes were rebranded as aphrodisiacs, sold in perfumeries under more marketable names. Even in Byzantium, scrolls describe women anointing themselves in the oils of stilled breath, a euphemism for embalming blends believed to increase longevity and allure. The Church eventually tried to stamp this out. By the early Middle Ages, religious leaders warned that wearing embalming oils was a vanity of the grave, and anyone who did so risked being seen as morbid or heretical. But in secret, among the elite, the tradition endured, quietly passed down in coded recipes and cloaked in euphemisms like temple oil or divine balm. Some modern perfumers have tried to recreate these ancient blends, using surviving ingredients and techniques. The results are powerful, almost overwhelming, thick, incense-heavy, and unlike anything you'll find in a department store. Those who wear them today say they feel different, not just fragrant, timeless. One especially poetic footnote: embalming oils may have been the original signature scent. Queens who wore them in life were anointed with the same mixtures in death, preserved not only in form but in fragrance. Their tombs still smell faintly of them, their legend carried on a scent trail. So the next time you spray on a little perfume before a date or an interview, remember the queens who came before you, the ones who wore scent not just to attract or impress, but to become unforgettable, to rise above time, death, and dust. Because when beauty is more than skin deep, it needs a scent to match. And sometimes that scent is strong enough to stop time. The candles flicker as she eases into the steaming bath, the vinegar-soaked cloth trailing behind her like a ghostly veil. Her ribcage flutters with each breath, cinched tightly beneath a corset that hasn't been fully loosened in weeks. A lady-in-waiting stands nearby, silent, holding a tray of lemon slices and lavender sachets. The queen, pale and ethereal, reclines back into the acidic water and closes her eyes. She has no appetite. But then again, beauty demands sacrifice, and vinegar and starvation are among her most loyal allies. Welcome to the Victorian era, where elegance meant fragility, and women, especially those in high society, prized a look so waifish, so translucent, it bordered on the otherworldly. Skin like alabaster, a waist you could encircle with 2 hands, and cheekbones so sharp they could slice bread were all signs of feminine virtue. To achieve that, queens and noblewomen across Europe turned to vinegar baths and brutal diets, or, more accurately, the absence of them. Let's begin with the bath. Victorian beauty manuals recommended vinegar soaks to lighten the skin and refine the appearance of flesh. Apple cider or white wine vinegar was poured into hot water, sometimes along with herbs like mint or chamomile to soften the sting. The acidity supposedly helped tighten the skin, reduce blemishes, and enhance that sought-after pallor. Queen Alexandra, wife of Edward VII, was rumoured to favour vinegar rub-downs, believing they helped maintain her porcelain glow. She wasn't alone. French Empress Eugénie de Montijo reportedly soaked in a diluted vinegar solution every morning, followed by an air dry under gauze curtains that filtered the sunlight into a soft glow. This wasn't just about cleanliness, it was about ritual, a daily rebirth into the ideals of beauty and restraint. But while the baths were harsh, they paled in comparison to the diet, or lack thereof. Victorian queens and ladies were expected to be delicate, both in manner and form. Eating heavily was associated with crudeness, masculinity, or, worse, lower classes. A noblewoman who ate sparingly demonstrated her refinement and self-discipline. Meals were often theatre. A small piece of toast pecked at like a bird, a spoonful of soup left half-finished, a sip of cordial that replaced an entire lunch. Some went further. Diaries and letters from the period reveal disturbing trends. Noblewomen who consumed only vinegar and water for days on end, convinced it would shrink their stomachs. Others nibbled on chalk or clay, hoping to neutralise hunger pangs or cleanse impurities. A few even turned to cotton balls soaked in broth. Yes, really, swallowed to simulate fullness without calories. The corset, of course, played a crucial role in all of this. By cinching the waist to impossibly small diameters, sometimes under 16 inches, corsets compressed the stomach and ribs, making large meals physically uncomfortable, even dangerous. Women wore them day and night, loosening only slightly for sleep. Fainting spells, shortness of breath, and digestive problems were common side effects, but often brushed off as charming evidence of feminine delicacy. One royal physician remarked in a letter that Queen Victoria's daughters, known for their slender figures, ate less than songbirds and slept in their corsets with stoic determination. Whether out of choice or pressure, their bodies became living sculptures of Victorian ideals. The fringe theories from the time make things even stranger. Some beauty guides claimed vinegar suppressed appetite by souring the tongue. Others promised that daily doses of lemon juice and vinegar would burn away the flesh from within in the most desirable way. Pseudoscientific charts were printed in women's magazines, mapping problem areas and recommending vinegar compresses for thighs, arms, and even the face. One particularly disturbing trend was tapeworm diets. Yes, actual tapeworm eggs, advertised in imported pill form, were rumoured to help women stay slim. The idea was that the parasite would consume excess calories and help maintain that ethereal figure. While no definitive royal connection has ever been confirmed, the popularity of this idea in the 19th century beauty world remains one of its most unsettling chapters. And yet, the results, the visual impact, were undeniable. Women glided through ballrooms like willows, their bones etched against silk, their faces a ghostly canvas of rosewater and powder. Artists painted them as if they were made of moonlight. Poets compared them to lilies, snowflakes, and angels on the edge of vanishing. Still, not everyone was enchanted. Some critics, especially emerging feminists, pointed out the cruelty of these beauty standards. Novels began to satirize the culture of fainting couches, smelling salts, and meagre meals. But for queens, trapped between tradition and expectation, rebellion wasn't always an option. To defy the image was to risk irrelevance. Queen Elizabeth of Austria, better known as Sisi, is perhaps the most tragic example. Renowned for her beauty, she became obsessed with maintaining her tiny waist and ghostly complexion. She ate almost nothing, only milk, broth, or the occasional orange, and spent hours being massaged, bathed, and corseted. Her hair, which reached her ankles, took 3 hours a day to brush. Her diary reveals a deep sadness, a sense of being imprisoned not by walls, but but by her own reflection. To make matters more surreal, Victorian beauty was often paired with morbidity. Pale skin wasn't just fashionable, it mimicked the look of tuberculosis, a disease associated with tragic beauty. Women painted blue veins onto their temples to enhance the illusion. Consumptive chic, they called it, romanticising a deadly illness in the name of aesthetics. And then there was arsenic. Yes, arsenic pills were marketed as skin lighteners and appetite suppressants. "Whiten your skin from within," promised one London apothecary. A few milligrams at a time, women poisoned themselves for the glow. Those who overindulged suffered tremors, vomiting, or worse. But moderation, deadly moderation, could supposedly yield a perfect complexion. These rituals weren't just about looking good, they were about disappearing gracefully. In a world that prized silence, softness, and submission, beauty became a kind of vanishing act. The thinner, paler, and quieter a woman became, the more she was praised. Yet behind the lace and porcelain was bone, hunger, and vinegar. Modern historians have unearthed journals, vanity manuals, and recipe books filled with vinegar-based skin tonics, starvation menus, and corset-tightening tips. The more extreme the regimen, the more revered its practitioner. Fainting at a ball was no longer a medical emergency. It was proof that you were doing everything right. Today, we might gawk at these rituals with horror or fascination, but some of their echoes still ripple through modern beauty culture. Detox teas, waist trainers, appetite-suppressant gummies. They've been rebranded, repackaged, and plastered with pastel labels, but the promise remains the same. Shrink yourself, cleanse yourself, control yourself. So next time someone offers you a miracle cleanse or suggests skipping a meal for beauty's sake, think of the queens who floated in vinegar baths, corseted to near collapse, sipping lemon water while painting a smile onto a starving face. Their beauty lit ballrooms and sparked poems, but it cost them dearly. A thick red smear glows faintly against her pale cheek, carefully blended with fingertips that tremble from cold. The wind outside howls against stone walls, but inside, the firelight flickers across mirrors and velvet drapes. The Countess smiles faintly at her reflection, not with joy, but calculation. Tonight's blush, as always, is perfect, vibrant, vivid, and just beneath the surface, still warm, because unlike rouge from berries or beetles, this blush is mixed with the blood of bats. Yes, bat blood. Not metaphor, not legend, but an actual viscous ingredient favoured by at least one notorious noblewoman of 16th century Transylvania, Countess Elizabeth Bathory. Her name still echoes in history, shrouded in myth, rumour, and horror. And while much of her life is twisted in the shadow of monstrous tales, one thread that holds strangely true is her obsession with beauty, an obsession that may have involved some of the most disturbing cosmetic practices ever recorded. Historians continue to argue which stories about Bathory are real and which were embellished by political enemies or panicked villagers. But among the more grounded whispers is the claim that she used bat blood, applied directly or blended with rouge, to enhance her natural pallor and give her cheeks a supernatural glow. Why bats? In folklore, bats were seen as creatures of darkness and mystery, often tied to the underworld, longevity and transformation. Their blood, believed by some fringe herbalists of the time to be rich in vital essence, was thought to stimulate the skin, prevent aging, and maintain youthfulness. A fringe theory held that nocturnal animals, creatures untouched by sunlight, held the secret to resisting time. It said that Elizabeth, whose family's vast lands teemed with cave-dwelling bats, would have them captured by servants and bled under moonlight. The blood was stored in tiny glass vials, sealed with wax and kept chilled in cellars. Applied fresh, it would coagulate quickly. Mixed with wine or fat, it remained usable for longer. One surviving account even describes a rouge of crimson vitality, rumoured to contain not only bat blood, but a tincture of rose, alum, and powdered coral. Whether this was science, superstition, or pure performance, the ritual was unmistakably theatrical. Imagine the Countess seated before her vanity, her rooms filled with silence save for the soft dripping of wax and the occasional distant squeak of bats outside. Her rouge is stirred by hand, the mixture thick, pungent, iron-scented. It's painted in slow, deliberate strokes, not merely to enhance her looks, but to wield power over perception. Bathory's beauty was legendary, even among her enemies. Her portraits show a woman with sharp features and piercing eyes, framed by elaborately coiffed hair and high-ruffled collars. Contemporary accounts describe her skin as snow-pale, unblemished, and without fatigue, and her cheeks, as always, flushed as if from dance, though she had not moved. For a woman in her 40s and 50s, at a time when most were considered old by their 30s, that appearance was remarkable. It inspired awe, fear, and envy. Blood as a beauty product wasn't entirely unheard of in Europe. Some nobles used leech blood or even their own drawn blood mixed with salves. In England, there were whispers of maidens applying fresh animal blood before masquerade balls to achieve a blushing virgin effect. But Bathory's alleged use of bat blood, and the methodical repeated nature of it, stands apart. Then there's the larger, darker mythos surrounding her, the infamous claims that she bathed in the blood of virgins to retain her youth. While almost certainly exaggerated or fabricated, likely fueled by religious and political opponents looking to seize her lands, these tales were built upon the foundation of her real beauty rituals, and bat blood was the first step. The symbolic resonance is eerie. Bats are creatures that drink blood, and here we have a woman who paints her face with theirs. She inverts the predator-prey relationship, turning the bat into both victim and vessel. In a society where noblewomen were often controlled and contained, Elizabeth's rumoured practices read like defiance, albeit macabre. Fringe records even mention bloodstones, crystals soaked in animal blood and left to absorb its properties, later pressed to the skin or worn as talismans. Some claim Bathory kept such stones at her bedside, cooled in water before being dabbed across her temples or cheeks. Beauty for her was ritual, and it often danced close to horror, and yet outside the extremes the principle survives. Even today there are beauty treatments that use vampire facials, injections of platelet-rich plasma, PRP, drawn from a person's own blood, believed to promote skin rejuvenation. The procedure involves micro-needling and smearing blood across the face. It's not as far from bat blood blush as we'd like to believe. Did Elizabeth Bathory truly believe her nightly rituals were working? Perhaps. Some letters she penned in her later years reflect an obsession with mirrors, with appearance, with the perception of youth. A court document from her trial mentions a vanity table covered in jars, rouge, salves, dried herbs, and a single glass vial of dark fluid. The truth behind it may never be confirmed, but the impression it left was indelible. Her imprisonment in Sejd Castle, where she spent her final years walled into a small room with only a slit for food, marks the tragic end of her legend. But even then, the stories did not fade. Servants whispered that she still applied rouge daily, still touched her cheeks with trembling fingers, still stared into a mirror she was forbidden to have. The image of Elizabeth Bathory, the blood-painted beauty, the woman who dared to turn death into blush, is now folklore. A cautionary tale, a feminist parable, a horror story in silk. But beneath the myth lies something simpler. A woman desperate to hold on to power, youth, and beauty in a world that allowed her little else. So if the next time you reach for a cream that promises to plump, or a serum to restore vitality, remember the Countess who reached for something far darker. And consider this. Beauty may be only skin deep, but the rituals we perform to preserve it often go much deeper. The morning mist drapes gently over marble columns, softening the edges of statues and silent courtyards. Inside the palace, an odd buzzing sound breaks the stillness. Not insects, but the low hum of bees, carefully trapped and transported in wooden boxes lined with linen. The Queen stirs. She knows what's coming. Today is a facial day, but not just any facial. Today, her skin will be stung into splendour. Welcome to the world of bee-sting facials, a treatment known to ancient Greeks and later adopted by high-born women throughout the Mediterranean. This wasn't a metaphor. It wasn't a balm or cream made from beeswax or honey, though those came later. This was the actual deliberate application of live bee venom to the face in small calculated doses, believed to tighten skin, erase wrinkles, and awaken the inner fire of youth. It may sound like another absurd beauty myth, but bee venom facials have historical roots that stretch back millennia. In Greek antiquity, women of high status, especially those influenced by the philosophies of natural medicine, were drawn to the idea that slight controlled pain could provoke the body into healing itself. Hippocratic texts hinted at the use of animal toxins in microdoses, and bee venom, used medicinally for arthritis and inflammation, began its slow crawl into beauty culture. The process wasn't as chaotic as you'd think. Queens and elite women didn't lie down in a meadow and hope for the best. Instead, bees were collected from well-fed hives, gently chilled or temporarily sedated, then placed in wooden or ceramic containers designed to hold them safely. An attendant, often trained in early apitherapy, would select a bee with tongs and press it gently, stinger poised, against the chosen area of the queen's face. The sting was quick, a pinprick. The venom entered the skin, causing immediate localized swelling and increased blood flow. The theory: this inflammation boosted collagen production, firmed sagging areas, and flushed the cheeks with a youthful glow. And while the science of ancient times couldn't articulate peptides and enzymes, modern researchers have found that bee venom does indeed contain compounds that stimulate the skin. Even today, venom-infused creams are sold under the name of natural Botox. But the ancients weren't thinking about retail. They were thinking about Aphrodite. Beauty in Greek culture wasn't just aesthetics. It was a sign of favour from the gods, and anything that could restore youth, even temporarily, was seen as a spiritual restoration. To undergo the sting ritual was to embrace a transformation, pain included, and make no mistake, it did hurt. Descriptions from early Greek and later Roman texts mention swelling, itching, and occasional blistering. Remedies were immediately applied, usually olive oil mixed with chamomile or cooled rose water to reduce the sting. Some women had their faces wrapped in linen soaked in lavender water afterward, both for scent and relief. Still, the results were coveted. Writers of the time described noblewomen who looked newborn in the moonlight, their cheeks flushed and taut. One physician boasted that his queen had the skin of a girl, 2 decades past her childhood, thanks to his customized venom schedule. The stings were placed carefully around the temples, the jawline, and occasionally the lips. The swelling smoothed fine lines, temporarily, but that was all they needed for a night of courtly admiration. Bee sting facials weren't exclusive to Greece. The practice migrated through Rome, where apothecaries adapted it into salves using crushed bee parts mixed with wax and herbs. Cleopatra herself, yes, her again, is rumoured in one fringe account to have experimented with live venom applications, though this is debated. Egyptian apothecaries certainly used bee products extensively, from royal jelly to honey dressings, but whether the queen ever let bees dance across her face remains an open mystery. What's clear is that by the time of the Byzantine Empire, bee venom treatments had become semi-medicalized. Female physicians, especially those treating noblewomen, carried vials of venom mixed with clay or ash. These were applied with pins or spatulas to simulate a sting without live bees, reducing risk but preserving the effect. The Byzantine Empress Theodora was reportedly a fan, receiving monthly nectar rites that combined honey massages with sting-inspired pulses of pain. And yes, things occasionally went wrong. Some women experienced allergic reactions, others endured too many stings, resulting in grotesque swelling, infection, or temporary disfigurement. One dramatic account from 5th century Athens tells of a noble bride whose entire face swelled the night before her wedding. The court panicked. Her physician disappeared. The wedding was postponed, though to her credit she recovered beautifully and never used the treatment again. Fringe practitioners also took the ritual further. Some believed that the placement of stings mattered spiritually, left cheek for vitality, right cheek for grace, forehead for wisdom. A few texts even reference full-body sting therapy to renew the skin of the soul. Thankfully, those didn't catch on widely. The symbolism of bees in ancient mythology also added layers of meaning. Bees were associated with divine order, femininity, and power. The priestesses of Artemis were known as Melissae, the bees. Wearing the sting of the bee, then, wasn't just about beauty. It was about stepping into the divine feminine, wielding nature's sting as both curse and crown. Fast forward a few centuries, and the practice all but disappears. Medieval Europe, more suspicious of anything involving stingers or blood, left the bees to their hives, but in pockets of folk medicine, and whispered among certain noble circles, the ritual survived in milder forms. Beeswax and honey stayed in beauty lore. The sting for a time faded, until recently. Today, bee venom has re-emerged in beauty culture with a vengeance. Luxury skincare brands infuse it into creams and serums, promising all the glow without the jab. Celebrities praise its lifting effect. And while no one's actively inviting bees into their bathrooms, hopefully, the echo of that ancient ritual is unmistakable, and it raises a fascinating question. Why does pain, however small, remain linked to beauty? Is it because we believe sacrifice brings reward? Or is it because, somewhere deep in our collective memory, we remember the queens who let themselves be stung for the fleeting radiance of a single night? Because that's what it always comes down to. A mirror, a moment, a sting, and the soft hum of bees fading into legend. The chamber is dim, its only illumination coming from the soft gleam of golden foil, thin as breath and fluttering with the slightest movement. The queen sits motionless, her face already dusted with a honey-scented cream. Her attendants move with reverence, using delicate tweezers to place the tissue-thin sheets across her cheeks, brow and jawline. Gold leaf, not jewellery, not decoration, but a mask, meant to heal, to illuminate, to preserve. Tonight, she quite literally wears her wealth on her face. In the final act of our journey through history's strangest beauty rituals, we find ourselves in ancient Egypt once more, where queens like Nefertiti and Cleopatra were said to embrace the luxurious, if dangerous, practice of gold leaf facials. And while the trend waxed and waned across centuries and continents, the image of gilded queens persists, radiant, still untouchable. The use of gold in cosmetics wasn't born of frivolity. Gold, in the ancient mind, was more than metal. It was incorruptible, eternal, sun-born, the flesh of the gods. The belief went, if gold could resist decay, it might help skin do the same. Its particles, once applied to the face, were thought to infuse vitality, improve blood flow, and, most ambitiously, stop time. Preparation was key. The gold was hammered into ultra-thin sheets, known as leaf, often no thicker than a strand of hair. This laborious process was performed by artisans trained to create the thinnest, most uniform product possible. Each sheet was stored between layers of parchment or papyrus, and only removed just before use. The queen's skin was prepared with oils, usually frankincense or moringa, and sometimes massaged with quartz rollers cooled in bowls of water. Once the skin was warm and supple, the gold was applied with tweezers or pressed by hand. Sheet by shimmering sheet, her face was covered in light. Then she waited, for an hour, sometimes two. During this time, the room was kept silent. Some rituals required soft chanting or the burning of sacred herbs. The goal was not just beautification, but spiritual alignment. Gold, they believed, attuned the body to divine frequencies. The longer it remained on the skin, the more thoroughly its power could be absorbed. And perhaps there was something to it. Gold has natural anti-inflammatory and antimicrobial properties. In the modern era, it's been used in treatments for arthritis and even certain skin conditions. Some luxury skincare products still tout colloidal gold as an ingredient, claiming it promotes elasticity and radiance. Science offers mixed results, but the allure endures. What ancient queens didn't realise, however, was that the adhesives and binders used to make the gold leaf stick often contained problematic ingredients. Lead, mercury, or mineral oils that clogged pores and inflamed tissue. The gold itself may have been inert, but the process left its mark, sometimes permanently. And yet, they returned to it again and again. Cleopatra, according to certain Roman sources, wore gold masks at night to preserve her beauty against the ravages of sleep. Though the accuracy of these reports is debated, archaeological evidence of gold-infused cosmetics exists. Traces of the metal have been found in burial jars and funerary makeup kits. Some mummies even had gold leaf applied to their lips, eyelids or fingernails. Perhaps a posthumous echo of the living ritual. In ancient China, gold leaf facials also found favour, particularly among empresses of the Han and Tang dynasties. These women believed gold not only beautified the skin but kept evil spirits at bay. Gold-infused balms were applied to the temples and pulse points, enhancing both looks and luck. One scroll describes a veil of fire worn by the empress, an ornate gold mask applied during festivals, designed to burn away the sins of time. In Rome, noblewomen crushed gold into powders and mixed it with rosewater for use as a shimmering foundation. But even then, there were warnings. One physician advised his patients not to bind gold to the face nightly, lest the flesh become dependent on its shine. By the Renaissance, gold had become a symbol not just of status but of desperation. In Venice, older noblewomen wore gold dust to hide wrinkles under candlelight. The shimmer masked imperfections, but also announced the lengths they would go to preserve the illusion. Elizabeth I's court, always eager to dazzle, embraced gold as both adornment and secret weapon. Some of her cosmetics included flecks of gold, or were stored in gilded pots to emphasize luxury. But by then, the risk was better understood. Physicians began cautioning against prolonged use, and gold leaf beauty rituals slowly fell from favour, replaced by less dramatic, if no less toxic, alternatives. Still, the fantasy of the golden face endured. Even today, high-end spas offer 24-karat gold facials, promising everything from cellular regeneration to cosmic balance. Celebrities pose with foil masks glowing under LED lights. And while the science remains sketchy, the symbolism is powerful. Gold is permanence, radiance, control. It whispers of queens who refused to age, who gilded themselves against gravity, who treated time like a servant to be defied, not obeyed. One final note. Gold, in many cultures, was also considered a bridge between the human and the divine. To wear it wasn't just to shine, it was to step into the realm of the gods, to declare without words, "I am more than woman, I am legend." And so, in her silent chamber, the queen wears her gold leaf mask. Not because she believes it will save her skin, but because she knows it will be remembered. The shimmer will fade. The leaf will be peeled away. But the story, that endures. The night deepens, and so does the quiet. You've journeyed through firelit bathhouses, across shadowy palace corridors, and into the secret chambers of queens who once ruled not just with sceptres, but with scent, sting, and shimmer. They wore crocodile dung as crowns, beetles as blush, leeches as luxury. Their beauty was not gentle. It was audacious, mysterious, sometimes grotesque, always unforgettable. Now the golden leaf peels away. The bat blood fades. The vinegar cools in forgotten basins, and the buzz of bees stills. Their rituals, once whispered over silk pillows and behind closed latticed windows, now drift softly across time. Odd echoes of humanity's long, relentless pursuit of perfection. Let your thoughts slow now. Imagine a queen, any queen, gazing into her mirror by candlelight. The room smells of rose and frankincense. Her skin glows, though not from magic, from effort, from fear, from hope. She knows the mask will crack by morning, that beauty is fleeting, but for now, for this moment, she has won. Her reflection obeys. These rituals, strange, sacred, absurd, remind us how human they were, and how human we still are. So breathe in. Let the incense swirl around you. Imagine the shimmer of fish scale, the cold sting of pearl paste, the weightless press of gold against your skin. Let the laughter of attendants echo distantly. Let the torches burn low. You don't need to wear the ritual. Only remember it. And now, as your eyes begin to close, as the queens of the past retreat into shadows and dreams, take comfort in knowing that beauty, real beauty, was never about the ingredients. It was always about the story.